So for this video, let's talk about what is, as far as I can tell from the research I've been able to do, a still unsolved road rage homicide from more than 30 years ago, just south of my hometown of Bartlesville, Oklahoma. It's Friday evening, around 10:30. Daniel Kelley Sr., a truck driver from Commerce, Texas, is hauling a load of livestock from Nebraska. His destination is Texas, where he is from. He's passing through Bartlesville, Oklahoma on his journey. This run was not just a business outing, but it was also a family outing, as three of Mr. Kelley's children were accompanying him on the trip. His 16-year-old daughter, Mindy, his 24-year-old, I believe he was 24 years old, son, Daniel Kelley, and there was also a younger son, about 12, who was with him. It's Thanksgiving break, the kids are out of school, so they had gone on this trip, already driven up to Nebraska, and now they were heading back from Nebraska to Texas and passing through Oklahoma. Now that I've kind of told you who these people were driving through and what they were doing, let's talk about what the road is like south of Bartlesville. Highway 75, as you exit the city, is 5 lanes of traffic going south. You have 2 lanes each way and a center left turn lane. Shortly after the city limits, the center turn lane goes away, and then it's a 4-lane highway divided by only a double center line for about a mile or so, and then you get to about 2 miles outside of town, a little over 2 miles outside of town. The road opens up into a 4-lane highway with a median. Now, the speed limit as you leave the city limits now is 50 miles an hour, and it gradually gets faster. And then after the highway opens up to the divided median portion, the speed limit is 70. But back then, the road was still under the U.S. mandated 55 mile per hour speed limit, so speed limit was probably 45 to 50 till you were out of town a ways, and then it went up to 55. But everybody pretty much back in the day drove faster than 55, especially once you got past the stretch where the road opens up and it's a divided highway. Nearly everybody drove faster than 55. Most people drove between 65 and 70 probably, and that's what the speed limit is now, is 70 miles per hour on that stretch. But back when this incident happened, it would have been 55. So around 10:30 p.m. on the Friday after Thanksgiving, Mr. Kelley is driving just south of Bartlesville along Highway 75. His daughter is in the passenger seat in the cab of the pickup, and his 2 sons are reportedly sleeping in the sleeper. He comes up along this pickup truck, described as a green and white pickup, and he wants to pass this pickup. He wants to drive about 65. And this apparently is based primarily on Mindy's account. She's the main witness. as he comes up along this slow-moving pickup truck, or maybe he was driving the speed limit, this pickup truck driver. He wants to pass him, but I guess they're in the left lane. You know, they didn't have the left lane law back then, but it was still kind of standard practice that the left lane was a fast lane and the right lane was a slow lane. This pickup truck isn't moving. He wants to go 65. Like I said, that's what most people drove on the road back even before the speed limit increased. So apparently, Mr. Kelley flashes his high beams at this pickup truck to try to communicate to the guy that he needs to move over. Now, was this a jerky thing of him to do? Not necessarily. People don't really seem to do this as much as they used to. Probably because of road rage incidents like the one that happened here and others that have happened in the country. But it used to be much more acceptable, especially when people were driving on a lot more two-lane roads before so many highways had expanded. It was much more common to flash your brights at somebody to let them know that you were about to pass, or that you wanted to pass, or that they should scoot over. So I don't think Mr. Kelley was necessarily trying to be a jerk, even though this pickup driver was frustrating him a little bit. But the pickup driver, for whatever reason, completely loses it and starts driving erratically, apparently tries to brake check Mr. Kelley. Mr. Kelley manages to avoid him through this and ends up driving on the right, and I guess was looking to just drive on and get away. And apparently the pickup driver pulled up alongside of him on Highway 75. So at this point, Mr. Kelley is in the right lane and the pickup truck driver is actually in the left lane passing him. The pickup truck driver pulls up alongside him, reaches over to roll the window down. This is based on the eyewitness accounts. And pulls out a handgun, fires 2 gunshots out the window. So 2 shots ring out. He shoots twice at the truck. The bullets go through the door and strike Mr. Kelley in the leg and hip, I believe. And one of them hits his artery. And the pickup truck just drives on. This was reportedly a lone driver. He was even described as about 6 foot tall. I don't know how exactly estimate that, maybe based on how he was sitting in the truck, with a mustache, 20s to 30s. So Mr. Kelley is shot twice. He is incapacitated, dying, bleeding out. And Mindy Kelley not only has to deal with her father dying, but has to get the truck under control so it doesn't crash. So she's trying to reach over to keep the truck from crashing, and her older brother, LaDane, is in the cab, sleeper, realizes something is wrong, and actually climbs out of the sleeper into the cab of the truck, and they managed to get the truck stopped. And from there, once the truck is stopped, the pickup truck driver has gone on. Their dad is dying. They managed to flag down a passerby, a good Samaritan, if you will. It was described in one report as a married couple. This couple apparently drove them to the hospital with Mr. Kelley, and, he was dead, pronounced dead at the hospital, unfortunately. Like I said, one of the bullets reportedly struck one of his arteries, which caused severe bleeding. So he was shot, but then bled to death. So like a lot of homicide investigations, there are some details that are kept under wraps in part, so the killer or the suspect doesn't know what the authorities know. It's unclear to me, that doesn't appear, it's never been mentioned that I could find, that there was a CB radio that they were able to radio for help in the truck. They were able to flag down a passing motorist who offered assistance. But it's quite possible they may not have contact between the drive back to Bartlesville, getting him into the hospital, getting to the emergency room, and the emergency room people having to call police to come and get statements. It's quite possible police might not have gotten a description of the suspect vehicle to go on for a good 20 minutes or more. And by that time, quite a few minutes have passed that who knows where the truck went. Mindy, I say apparently, maybe I should clarify that, she seems to be the only witness, or the main witness, who is able to provide all these details. Just based on, obviously, Mr. Kelley was killed, and she was the passenger, and her brothers were in the sleeper. They wouldn't have seen as much. Describe the suspect vehicle as a green and white pickup. That's about as detailed a description as was ever issued, at least publicly. When I hear green and white pickup, I'm thinking of the two-tone trucks from the 70s, like the ones made by Chevy and GMC. Ford also had some two-tone pickups. Some other brands did as well. They haven't stated if they were ever able to narrow it down to, what kind of pickup truck exactly it was. But that's what we know about it. It was a green and white pickup truck. And even with the time delay for, probably being able to report what happened, because none of these people would have had cell phones back then. I highly doubt it. 16-year-old teenagers didn't have cell phones unless you were from Beverly Hills or someplace like that. Not back in 1991. Nobody would have had one. So, I don't know if maybe when the description went out, it did probably go out within a half hour of this happening. I'm sure the authorities were hopeful that, their fellow officers across the state would be on the lookout for pickups like that, and they would stop them, get the information about who the owner was, be able to narrow this down and solve the case. But Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to have happened. Within days of Mr. Kelley's murder, they were already saying, we can't find the truck. There's lots of pickup trucks registered in Oklahoma. I'm not 100% sure if it was an Oklahoma truck. I would think it would have been, but could have been from somebody from another state, obviously. And as far as I know, this case remains unsolved. Well, I said earlier in the video, one of the reasons why truck drivers and motorists in general don't flash their high beams to signal that they're going to pass as often anymore is because of this incident and others like it. And I don't think that's too much of an understatement, because this incident initially received quite a bit of publicity in the local area and in Oklahoma in the immediate aftermath of what happened. Unfortunately, after the initial burst of press coverage, once it became apparent they weren't going to be finding the truck real fast, and that this was going to likely turn into a long-term unsolved homicide, the press coverage pretty much stopped. And this happened in 1991, before really the World Wide Web became popular, and before a lot of newspapers had websites. It's actually not that easy to find information on it with a Google search. You really have to punch in some specific keywords, like the name of the victim, and to really get any hits. Newspapers.com, this isn't an endorsement, but if you do a search on that, you will be able to find some articles if you punch in the right words. It's really hard to find information about it now, other than the old articles from within the first few days or week after the incident. And Mr. Kelley was buried rather quickly. I feel like that's worth noting. They did mention in some of the articles, apparently his funeral was held Sunday or Monday after. This happened late on a Friday night, and his funeral was held in his town of Commerce, Texas, where he lived. Pretty much just a couple of days later, which seems odd to me that, a victim of a homicide, that their body would be released that fast. But that is one of the things you can find. I could not find, doing any searches online anyway, any follow-up articles from, years, 1 year anniversary, years after the fact, saying, hey, whatever happened to this, murder case. Doesn't mean to say maybe there isn't one, but I just didn't find it. And it's pretty much been forgotten about, unfortunately. You hate to say that, but, if I, myself, I got the idea for this video, if I hadn't remembered this happening from when I was young and hearing about it, I wasn't of driving age, but I remember hearing about it, as I lived in Bartlesville. I don't know that there's anything that would have really brought it to my attention if I hadn't remembered it from way back when, and I hadn't finally, after doing some searching, managed to find a few things that told me about it and reminded me of what happened, confirmed what I remembered happening. For what it's worth, the term road rage, or road rage homicide, or road rage incident, near as I can tell, was not used to describe what happened in the articles that immediately follow and press coverage that immediately followed the incident, which prompted me to do a little bit of research on when was road rage formed as a term. Basically, it's officially credited as starting in California in 1987 following some freeway shootings. So, since it started being used following shootings on the highway in California, it seems appropriate enough to use it to describe this one. And now, of course, that term is much more widely used and much more commonly used to describe incidents like this. Now, granted, I didn't contact the Washington County Sheriff's Office to get any comment for this video. I'll just put that out as a disclaimer. But one of the drawbacks to the lack of follow-up press coverage about this has been nothing, to my knowledge, has ever really been released or made public as far as, were they ever able to eventually, how did they conduct their investigation? Were they able to narrow down any suspects and they just didn't have enough evidence to prosecute them or anything like that? No, nothing like that has ever been made public that I'm aware of. This is definitely a case that could stand for a cold case squad of detectives to start looking over and seeing if there's any way they can maybe narrow down suspects. I'm guessing if all the description they had on the truck was what they publicly released and that was all, I would like to think they know a little bit more, maybe have a better idea of at least the type of truck it might have been, Chevy, Ford, Dodge, whatever, that they just kept under wraps. But, yeah, we just don't know, do we? Not us on the outside looking in, anyways. We don't know what the sheriff's office knows. But it makes you wonder, maybe there are just so many trucks registered, even with, trying to narrow it down based on the color scheme was just nearly an impossible task. Certainly would be a lot of vehicles to follow up on. The description of the suspect, based on what was in the news coverage of the eyewitness accounts, actually makes a lot of sense to me. A lone individual in the pickup, apparently. That makes sense. If there was more than one person involved, there's a chance one of them would eventually along the line slip up or tell on the other. Don't know exactly how they figured this out. Maybe the fact how he stood or in the truck, they may have been able to see this sitting up in the truck The headlights obviously are above the pickup, 6 foot tall or so. He apparently reached across the cab and rolled down the window. That makes sense. A lot of those pickups back then especially were much more basic. They weren't like the luxury vehicles we have today. Probably would have had to reach across and roll the window down with the crank. Now he was described as late 20s, early 30s. That makes sense. I don't think this would be a rebellious teenager driving around by himself with a gun in the car. That just doesn't sound right to me. This would have to be somebody, even though they lost his temper, whatever, and would completely lost his cool, to shoot out the window like that in a moving vehicle and basically lose your temper like that and act like that. That seems to me to be a more hardened, seasoned person. So the age range that was described makes a lot of sense. Now, another thing, don't use any of my videos to consult as a guide for Oklahoma gun laws. Let's put that out there. Don't use it as a guide for that. But I'm 99.9% sure that back when this happened, it was illegal to carry a loaded handgun in a car in Oklahoma unless you had a concealed carry permit. I don't see this as being a law-abiding citizen who loses his cool, who would have been a concealed carry permit owner. Maybe the sheriff's office and the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation checked to see what registered permit holders, own pickups like this, but I'm sure they were pretty quickly rolled out. So this person was carrying a loaded gun in the car, up to no good. Strikes me as somebody who might have had a criminal record or, has a record after this. Even if he wasn't caught for this homicide, this seems like somebody who would have eventually done something to get himself in trouble with the law otherwise. But yeah, I've thought about this. I think, maybe part of the reason why he was driving slow, driving the speed limit, maybe, on a highway where, nearly everybody else is wanting to go faster, wasn't really driving in the right lane like he should have been, apparently. Bottom line, I think he was driving slow, driving the speed limit in a conscientious effort to avoid being pulled over. And he didn't shoot out his window at the truck because he was, super offended that, some trucker was wanting to drive faster than him. He lost his temper because, he just got too offended by being flashed with his high beams, being mad over something he shouldn't have been that mad about, to put it lightly. Also, in terms of the eyewitness accounts, him shooting out the window, firing 2 shots, the way they hit Mr. Kelley, go through the door of his truck and enter in the hip and leg area. That makes sense. The truck is going to sit up higher than the pickup, and you can't shoot up too high at the truck driver's chest or head, because otherwise you'll be shooting through the roof and the cab of the pickup. But definitely based on the angle and the way he was firing the gun, this shooting was very deliberate and intentional, even if the initial motivation was just the pickup driver losing his temper. One thing that would be nice to know is if the sheriff's office or the OSBI, which assisted with the case, ever attempted to have an FBI criminal profiler do a profile on the suspect. And even though that's just a guide or, maybe a place to help narrow down possibilities for what to look for, it would be interesting to see what all a professional profiler would say about the suspect. And one thing I've also wondered about since, researching this old case is I wonder what the profilers or the investigators think of what is this suspect's relationship like with his family. Is he close to his mom and dad, his brothers and sisters? What do they think along those lines? It doesn't appear, well, if any tips were ever called in, along the lines of, hey, my hot-tempered brother was in town for Thanksgiving and he left, Dewey north of Bartlesville at about, 10 o'clock, and he may have ran into that truck driver and he drives a, green and white pickup truck. I mean, if any tips like that were ever given to the authorities, I guess nothing ever came of them. But it makes you wonder if anybody in his family would have suspected him of doing this, or what his relationship like is with his family and those closest to him. That, no one's ever, I guess, given a firm tip on somebody to say, you really ought to look at this guy. And if nobody in the suspect's family has ever attempted to turn him in, does that more likely mean that they're not very close to him, don't know what kind of vehicle he drives, don't know where he would have been on Thanksgiving break, or does it mean that he's, so close to them that they're protecting him even if they suspect he might have done it? Makes you wonder. I'd be also curious to know what a profiler would say about how far away the suspect likely lives from the scene of the crime. I would think, just my guess, that this would be a highway the pickup driver has driven down before and is familiar with. Just because I think you would probably be more apt to react so poorly if you were maybe already familiar with the area and thought you could get away with it for whatever reason. I'm going to guess the suspect lives probably within an hour, hour and a half of where this happened, just south of Bartlesville. But, or at least he did at the time, but could be completely wrong. That'd be something interesting to know. What charges should the pickup driver face? Obviously, this is a hypothetical because even after all these years, we don't know who the driver was. This case has gone unsolved for this long. Not sure what it'll take to solve it, but assuming they were able to determine who was driving the truck that night and who shot at Mr. Kelley. This isn't as clear and cut dry probably as it should be for a lot of people, because some jurors might struggle with the issue of premeditation. Usually the worst murder charge, first-degree murder, is reserved for premeditated murder. And some people might feel like some guy losing his temper in a situation like this and shooting someone, maybe that's more akin to second-degree murder or manslaughter. But I don't feel that way. If I was the Washington County prosecutor and the sheriff's office brought a suspect to me who I felt did it, I think I would go ahead and charge the pickup driver in this case with first-degree murder. One thing about premeditation, this can be a tough issue for juries. There's probably in almost every state in the U.S., I don't think there's a well-defined time frame for how long somebody has to be planning, how long they have to be thinking about it before they committed the act. Usually, the concept of premeditation would imply that there was forethought, planning, but in this case, even though it appears to have happened relatively quickly, I think charging him with first-degree murder would be warranted. You're driving around with a loaded gun looking for trouble. And you certainly had some premeditation and forethought and planning when you reached across the cab of your truck and rolled the window down, and then you keep the gun steady enough to fire 2 shots out the window, going through the door of the truck you're driving by and killing the driver. I mean, what did you think was going to happen? You're not shooting through there to scare somebody. And any reasonable person ought to know you shoot at a moving vehicle like that, and in that situation, you're, most likely going to kill somebody. Or pretty good chance you are. It is, so yeah, I think this was deliberate enough that I would probably go ahead and charge the suspect with that. Maybe the legal experts in law enforcement would disagree. There is no statute of limitations on murder. Maybe there is on manslaughter. But definitely deserves to be charged with murder. So, one other thing about the suspect. This strikes me as somebody who is probably used to never being the bigger person in a situation. Know what I mean by that is, even if he was annoyed with Mr. Kelley flashing his high beams at him and wanting to drive faster, he could have been the bigger person and just let him go by, or just drove on and not done anything. But no, it's obvious to this person probably has trouble letting things go, being the bigger person in a confrontation, walking away from confrontation, which would definitely lead me to think that it sounds like somebody that, even if he got away with this homicide, has probably gotten in trouble with the law for something along the lines of an assault, or maybe even a murder, or something like this somewhere later on down the line. Well, unfortunately, the best way to probably conclude this video is just to reiterate that the case remains unsolved, and seems like it will be a difficult case to solve over 30 years later. But I hope that the Washington County Sheriff's Office, or the OSBI, or somebody with authority to investigate this and look at the case files would reopen it and take a closer look at it. A lot has changed in 30 years too. Maybe, believe it or not, maybe we could find out something we haven't learned before. Check a new lead or an old lead. So, and thank you for watching if you made it this far.